Hey, everybody, welcome back to The Gold Mine. We have another fantastic show laid out here for you. I'm excited to get into part two of the three-part series on suicide prevention. We got a fantastic lineup. Mike's rejoining us. We got Mark with us today. We got James with us today. And of course, Shaun and myself were very excited. Now, while we are excited to get this started, y'all should be too. Hit the button, the like buttons, the subscribe buttons, all the notification bells, all of the things so you get your emails when we go live, which is, of course, on Wednesdays. It is fantastic. So let's get some intros once again, real quick, and then we will hit up the conversation. We'll start at the bottom this time. James, you're going first. Who are you? Where you come from? All that good stuff. Hit us up.
All right. Real cliff notes. James Gearing from England originally, spent 14 years as a firefighter here in America, firefighter paramedic, and host of the Behind the Shield podcast the last 7 years.
Bam. I like it. Mark, how about yourself?
Hey, everybody. Mark Bouchard. I'm with the RCMP, about 16 years of policing, 14 years with Delta Police, background in mental health. I did my master's in leadership, studying police culture and police officer mental health, and then wrote a book about it, setting my sights on stigma.
Bam. I like it. And we got a bunch of people who already have those in the background. We were just talking about that. Mike, how about yourself? Oh, you got to unmute yourself first, though.
Technology's hard. Recently retired police officer, 21 years of police experience with 2 different services, 10 years as a corrections officer before that. About to start on my master's in counseling psychology.
Bam. I like it. Now, Shaun, from yesterday, any thoughts percolate up after the conversation we had from day one?
Just that I think it was a real good framework or foundation that was set by the guests yesterday. So I think we're in a pretty good position today to just launch straight into it.
I agree. So here's the first question I have for y'all. How do we prevent suicide? It is the big question. It is the big thing. Let's start where we began. James, what are your first thoughts?
I'm going to throw 2 things out there because they are the least discussed parts of this conversation, I think. The first one, especially in my community in fire, that's not discussed is sleep deprivation. The same tool that we use to weed out people in special forces selection, the same tool we use to interrogate people, we put onto our first responders. So if we are not looking at rest and recovery in everyone, I mean, obviously we're a lot of us are wearing uniform at the moment, but the general population, it could be a factory worker that works nights, whatever it is, then we're missing a massive part of that conversation. The other thing that I'll throw out there right from the beginning that became apparent to me as I listened to hundreds and hundreds of conversations and the interviews was a lot of us came from a generation where we were like, what a cowardly thing to do. How could they do that? It's so selfish. Think of your wife, think of your kids. And then you listen to people who have actually been there. I mean, I've had people on the show, hundreds of people that have been so close. Suicide ideation just never actually went through, thank goodness. And then I've had some people that went through with it and they survived. And there is a resounding commonality to the feeling of burdensome. And if you think about all the compounding factors that come into ultimately leading someone to crisis, to suicide ideation, from sleep deprivation to childhood trauma to organizational betrayal to pharmaceuticals, the perfect storm or the imperfect storm, if you like, there appears to be a miswiring of the brain by that point. So someone's entire reality is distorted. And when you hear the voices of people that have been in that dark place, they truly believe that they are a burden to their loved ones. And a tragic example is we had 2 police officers here about almost a year ago now, young couple. The boyfriend took his own life first, and then I think it was barely a week the mother did, the girlfriend did, and they left behind an infant child. So there is no way that a healthy mind can look at that and go, oh, I understand it. But when you look at it through an unhealthy mind, where you truly believe that you are such a burden, a horrible person, the reason for someone's pain, then all of a sudden suicide actually is a courageous act. It's a selfless act. And if you say someone in crisis, hey, think about your family, well, you're actually kind of pushing them towards it. So these are two areas that I don't think you hear a lot of people talking about, that I was just, fortunate enough to fall into with all these, interviews that I've done. But the sleep deprivation side and understanding that trauma can create a distorted reality where suicide seems like the selfless kind action from someone in crisis who truly believes that they are a burden, even though to a healthy mind looking out, the reality is it leaves the people with more pain, not less.
Yeah, absolutely. Mark, you want to jump in here? First thoughts?
Yeah. Thanks, James. That's very insightful. And I'm going to build off a couple things you said. Number one, you talked about sleep. So crucial. Matthew Walker in Why We Sleep writes, we have a bi-directional relationship between sleep and mental health. And specifically for first responders, military, shift workers, all that, we're knowingly going to dysregulate your sleep pattern, not let alone throw trauma at you and all that. It's going to mess with your hormones, your chemicals, a whole bunch of stuff that you can't see. I ended up off work for probably 2 or 3 months on stress leave, and I got a blood test done, and a bunch of my, whatever, chemical hormonal markers were all super off. So my good hormones were way down and my bad hormones were super high. So just understanding that's a part of what's happening. And even though when you look in the mirror, you can't see it, it doesn't mean it's not happening under the surface. I also want to say, really what we, I think, have historically done is been focused more on a disease-based model. We're looking at the problem of it. We're talking about, just more crisis intervention lines. Like we're talking about the downstream, trying to catch someone at the last minute, instead of really getting to the root of the problem and being able to get upstream, teach people early, have programs in place, early intervention, psychoeducation, and honestly, even culture change. It can't just be, well, there's a number, I don't know why they didn't call. Like we can't just say, well, we have a policy in place. Like we need to really look at the culture and understand what's actually happening. The two other things I want to highlight. One, you talked about perceived burdensomeness. That's a really big deal. So Dr. Thomas Joyner has a model around suicide that I think is very, very, is a good model. So anyways, he has two main factors. One is, I think he calls it thwarted belonging or isolation, but really it's basically disconnection, a loss of identity of who you are and loss of connection with others. But the second part of his model is that perceived burdensomeness. And when you learn from the people who study suicide notes, that's often what they see is for the people who have become suicidal, their mind tricks them into believing that they're a burden on their family, that their families will be better off. And those are the kind of comments you anecdotally hear. It's like, oh, people would be better off without me. We need to know that's like the giant warning sign. People are rarely going to say, hey, I'm feeling suicidal today. But you might hear someone saying, yeah, my family would be better off without me. Or I don't want to be here. Or like that's the kind of ways it's manifesting, how it's kind of showing up day to day. So we need to be aware of that so that we can watch for it, right? And the last thing I want to add to the conversation is really that I learned from someone like Kevin Hines, right? Kevin Hines, a suicide prevention advocate, jumped off the Golden Gate Bridge and survived. And what he learned immediately after jumping off the bridge, he wanted to die. He thought he wanted to die. And as soon as he let go of the railing, all he wanted to do was live. And that's a commonality that I've heard in many of the stories from suicide survivor attempts. Another one would be Dakota Meyer, who held a gun to his head and pulled the trigger. And it didn't go off because someone had unloaded it. And the guy's a Medal of Honor winner, would know how to reload a gun. And he's still here many years later because he just didn't know that he didn't want to die. And it's when they hit that point, they come to that realization. So we need to educate people and teach them enough ahead of time so that they don't have to learn the hard way, because sadly, so many people don't learn until they actually make a suicide attempt, and we lose too many of those people.
Yeah, absolutely. Mike, thoughts on this?
Wow, you guys said a lot there in a very short time. So one of the things I didn't talk about yesterday is that for the last 10 years of my police career, I was a crisis negotiator. So I have spoken to hundreds of people that were about to commit suicide. And one of the things that you guys both touched on is that burden aspect, how they feel like their family, their loved ones would be better off if they weren't here. And I can tell you that is like almost exclusively what they say in the process of that negotiation. They truly believe that their children, their families, their friends, relatives, whoever will be better if they're gone. And trying to change their mind in the process while they're in that crisis is like trying to convince you that the sky is not blue. It's like that's their belief. They truly think that. And really, one of our goals in the negotiation would be to try to keep them talking long enough that they start on their own to come to realize that maybe that's not the case. The sleep thing, you guys hit all the same points on that I would have. And I know from my own experience, everything is harder when you're tired. And then when you add in just that extra sleep deprivation from shift work, from long hours, from stress, from whatever, I mean, it's harder to do everything. It's harder to tie your shoes. It's harder to just get through the day. So put crisis on top of that, and it's just exponential. And then the last thing I'll say is the more conversations like this one that happen, whether it's in a public venue or not, we just need to keep talking about it all the time to whoever will listen. Talking about warning signs, talking about the psychology of it, so that people understand that it's not their fault that they feel broken. It's not their fault that they're in this place. Just like it's not your fault if you end up with any other illness. It's not your fault if you end up with an incurable disease. But for the most part, when people find out they've got a life-threatening disease, they fight through it. So we need to teach people how to fight through this as well.
Absolutely. Shaun, what are your thoughts on this?
Well, as the fellows were talking, I was thinking about how what we're doing right now is kind of normalizing the conversation in respect to suicide. We are talking about it openly and more frequently since we've been involved with the collective. This is not the first time we've had this conversation. But over these 3 days that we're doing this suicide awareness, suicide prevention series, we're going to be talking about it from a number of different perspectives. And then maybe we won't touch it again for another year. Maybe we won't touch it for another 6 months. But here's what I was thinking when I was listening to the guys. First time I kind of thought about the relationship of sleep to suicide was when I was speaking with James. James was one of the first guys that kind of made me shake my head and think, yeah, obviously there's a connection there, but how deep is it? And so I had to go off on my own little PubMed research path. I had to do what Shaun likes to do, and that is get all nerdy on the subject and learn as much as I could, because I didn't know enough about the subject. I didn't know enough about cortisol. I didn't know enough about et cetera. And so I went down my own little avenue of further research. And then I came back into the conversation more aware of how sleep can negatively impact the human mind. I already knew all of that stuff from being a coach and being an athlete, but I hadn't made the connection from sleep to suicide. And so James really pushed that. I want to say a couple of years ago, you were really pushing that message in respect to firefighters, shift workers predominantly, quite negatively impactful. And so then, of course, bumped into Mark and reading Mark's book and talking with Mark. There have been some other things that have bubbled up out of Mark's book that I had never considered deeply enough. I was aware of them, but I just hadn't thought deeply enough about them. And so my point is this, that I've been looking at the subject of suicide for quite a long time. And I like to think I'm reasonably well read, but I'm not a PhD. I'm not a subject matter expert on it, but I know a thing or two. But there's always more to learn. And it's not just learning, there's always more to connect the dots learn. So sleep to suicide, or this to suicide, or that to suicide, making those connections within our open conversation, which is what we're doing right now. The thing that ultimately bubbled up out of that, what the guests have just said, is a completely different idea, and that is the idea of suicide clusters, which I know the guests are probably very familiar with. The concept that suicides can occur either localized or geographically co-located, so that there's almost a reinforcing belief of, well, if that guy did it, it's okay for me to do it, where there's this reinforcement of suicide is now acceptable. And for a broken mind, or for a mind that is poisoned either through neurochemical hormones, or through lack of sleep, or through lack of context, the mind is being poisoned into the belief that it's perfectly acceptable and normal to think that if the guy across the street just committed suicide, it's okay for me to do it as well. This normalization, this cluster mentality. So, and if anyone doesn't know what I'm talking about, the research is out there, the evidence is out there, the pattern is out there. So when I think about a suicide cluster, my mind goes to this. Well, the suicide cluster is the ambush. How do we counter ambush it? Because that is how my mind works. I think strategically and tactically like a military individual. And so to counter ambush the suicide clusters, first of all, you've got to talk about the fact that suicide ambushes are a thing. You have to discuss that a cluster is a thing. You have to make people aware that if it's geographically co-located, it's time to really dial up the radar and really seek those red flags, not just passively keep your ear open, but actively pursue out into that localized community. Hey, what's up? We really got to dial into this situation. So thinking of suicide as the ambush, I'm now thinking of the counter ambush scenarios for this particular subject.
There's a lot in there, and the one thing that I want to touch on, that I want to get your guys' thoughts on here, goes to what you're saying, Shaun, and it has a lot to do with negative alignment. And one of the things that I realized over time, especially with my own experiences, was the fact that small things start to align you down that path. So when you're not feeling great, when you are in that negative mindset, or perhaps you've had some ideation in the past, and you start to have a bad day, you start to align things into that pattern, right? So you wake up and you're just absolutely exhausted, and your brain's not feeling great, and then your shoelace snaps when you go to tie up your shoes, and you're just, of course that's going to happen today. And then you get cut off in traffic, of course that's going to happen today. And it just starts to align you down that path to where you start to feel, again, to everyone's point, like what am I even doing here? What am I even doing here? Everything seems to be going wrong. I shouldn't be here to begin with. It's going to make everybody's life easier if I just step out of the way. And I just wanted to kind of touch on that, and then get your guys' thoughts on how easy it is to align all of those negatives as they happen. And then you start to create a negative cycle, right? Of everything starts to become bad, and everything starts to add on, and everything starts to pile on, whether it's positive or negative. You just it starts to fall down that side of the pile. Let's go around one more time. James, thoughts?
So firstly, on the clusters, kind of building on that side, I think another thing that a lot of us don't really think about is, if you are a person who's getting to this dark place, but you are also a person who wears a uniform, who's taken an oath to risk their life or possibly lose their life for others, I think our professions, plural, are even more likely, because we've already come to terms with our own death in a structure fire, in combat, whatever it is. So I think that there's a little bit more of a push because, we've signed that check, that blank check, as it were, and we've come to terms with that. And you've also got that kind of service burning in your heart. So I think that might be one of the reasons why in our professions we see that a little bit more. And then if you perceive that as an honorable death from someone that you're close to, there is the kind of domino effect. And we see that in the fire service as well. It does seem to come in clusters. Another thing, as far as that bad day, I think that really is a catalyst is alcohol. Now, obviously, other things can come into play as well, but I've heard, again, many people, usually when they're doing, when they are about to make their attempt, or if they've actually followed through with the attempt, drinking is involved. And this I don't mean to kind of joke during such a serious situation, but if you think about it, I will put my hand on my heart and say that I have been with women that if I was stone cold sober, I never would have been with. So it can distort, our reality. It can lower inhibitions, whether it's romantically or whether it's other ways. And then you add the compounding element of a sleep deprived community that then drinks alcohol to wind down, therefore implementing or affecting sleep negatively on the days that they're not on shift or not deployed, then that's another compounding factor. So I think this is why the suicide conversation, and you could, compare it to the school violence conversation. The reason why I think it hasn't progressed in a lot of ways is we're having a very nuanced talk, and there's all these different layers, and so we're bringing them all together. But if you just say, oh, it's because of what you saw in war, or you were at the Grenfell Tower fire, that's why you're struggling, then we miss 95% of the people that are struggling from all the other elements as well. So I think our selfless service and our ability to be okay with risking our lives is part of it. And then I think adding to that compounding bad day, what was the night before like? Did we come off shift as a firefighter 2 nights ago and then we we drank before we went to bed last night? And I think that adds to this amplification of frustration and depression.
Yeah. I mean, there's a reason it's called liquid courage, right? Like that it absolutely allows for the removal of inhibitions. Mark, thoughts?
Yeah, I'll build on James's thoughts again. Once again, I love what you're saying, James. You talked about our ability to overcome fear or some variation of that. And actually with Dr. Joyner's model, so he has those 2 main ones I mentioned. And the third one is that in a perverse way, our ability to overcome fear of injury, fear of pain, fear of death, that serves us so much as first responders in the military, ends up working against us and makes us more susceptible to actually overcoming that. Another group that's actually has a commonality is veterinarians. So the godfather for my child is a veterinarian, and they have a Facebook group called Not One More Vet because they have been losing so many veterinarians to suicide. The rate of suicide for veterinarians is 4 times higher than the general public, whereas say the police, ours is significantly higher, but ours is about 54, 56% higher. So that ability to overcome fear, and to me, part of that is that veterinarians have access to medication that is making it easier for them to do it. Much like police officers, we have access to firearms, which is another a risk factor for us, essentially. The other thing you mentioned was alcohol. Again, that's crucial. So Dr. Olivia Johnson from the Blue Wall Institute, she has what she calls the Fatal 10. She's done like hundreds of suicide autopsies, and she has her top risk factors. And the number 1 is like interpersonal relationship, basically like marital breakdown, that type of stuff. And number 2 is substance abuse, right? So basically, long-term drinking, using substances. And in some of the research I was doing, just combing through research on suicide, there was some disagreement about short-term alcohol use, that actually Dr. Joyner believed that sometimes it's people actually stop drinking. But different researchers agreed that long-term alcohol abuse is a significant risk factor. And Shaun, I want to tie into what you said about the counterattack. Like, what do you do? How do you counterattack the ambush? And to me, that's really cultural change. Like, I look at this group and I see a ton of people with a lot of respect in the cultures they come from, fire, military, police, you name it. And it's us interacting with our cultures, translating the science, the research, and normalizing the hardships that people will go through, and then basically encouraging healthy coping strategies instead. So instead of, like, when I was a new cop, after night shift, we're already tired, we're going to go drink beers in a parking lot. Stupid. Like, if we want to have a system that makes sure we're not going to be suicidal, that is not the system. And it's not something we do anymore. But that's where we can start interacting with the culture and changing it. Because as newer people, and even the people doing the job, hear from people they respect, like people in this group, they'll start to change their opinions and actually their mental models and their actions. And that's what's actually going to change the outcomes.
Yeah, absolutely. Mike, thoughts?
Yeah, lots. Going after you guys, there's always so much to add to the conversation. I'll talk about the alcohol thing for a minute, because I think when somebody gets to that point of thinking that suicide is actually the best solution for them, a whole bunch of things have happened that are out of their control, whether it's the loss of a loved one, loss of a job, exposure to trauma, especially in the first responder and military community. But then other things start to happen that are within their control, like substance abuse, alcohol, drugs, whatever, or whatever their vice is. Maybe it's gambling, maybe it's sex or porn, or whatever their numbing mechanism is, online shopping even. And then you look at the totality of all of those circumstances together, the constellation of risk factors, some beyond their control, but some completely within their control, even if they're not maybe in the place to make those healthy decisions. If we can start picking away at one or two of those things at a time, then maybe they'll have a clearer mind in the moment where they think, is this the answer? I've thought about that myself. Like, I've been in places where I thought, maybe it's time for me not to be here anymore. Fortunately, I've always been able to say, no, that's not right. I'm good. But then I have to make the conscious decision to go and eliminate some of those contributing factors, like whether it's alcohol or whatever I'm using to numb or escape. You can probably tell by looking at me that food is one of my choices. But the simple act of overcoming eliminating one of those risk factors. I'll go off on a tangent here for a second. I was listening to Dr. Andrew Huberman not that long ago, and he had David Goggins on his show. And they were talking about, I'm looking at my screen here because I couldn't remember what this part of the brain was called, but he said that the anterior mid cingulate cortex is the part of the brain where willpower and the will to live comes from. And that part of the brain is like a muscle. And I am summarizing what he said probably very poorly. So the caveat is, if you want to actually know what he talks about, you maybe go listen to him, because I'm going to screw it up. But that part of the brain is like a muscle that can grow or that can shrink. And you grow that muscle by doing hard things that you don't want to do. So if you want to go to the gym and work out, it doesn't help that part of the brain. If you don't want to go to the gym and work out and do it anyway, it will help that part of the brain. So if you're in a rough spot in your life and you make a choice that you don't want to make, but you make it anyway, you're going to help grow that part of the brain and therefore increase your own willpower and increase your own will to live. So if we can get people to make hard decisions in those moments and do things that are good for them that maybe they don't want to do. If I'm interpreting Andrew Huberman's research correctly, then that's only going to help people.
Yeah, absolutely. Shaun, what are your thoughts?
So I'll throw this out there for anyone who has got it wrong about me. I think that any bad habits that I've got, I'm not about stripping them out and then leaving a blank space. I'm about replacing it with something positive. So if I've got to get rid of drinking, I'm not just getting rid of drinking and then seeing what fills the space. Maybe my idleness will fill that space. Maybe another negative habit will fill that space. So if I've got to get rid of drinking, I've got to fill it with something positive, which means I'll probably get to ride my bike more or frickin' design the world's best frisbee. Whatever it is, it's not just a matter of stripping out the bad things. It's about replacing the bad things with something that is positive. And to Mike's point, the anterior cingulate. So the this might come as a surprise to some people. This was a question that was asked of me when I stepped into our local bakery here in Rossland, and one of the girls in the back said, "Hey, you are doing something pretty much every day, yeah? Yeah, I am. Do you ride every day? Pretty much. So do you like love it? Are you stoked to do it every single day?" And I said, "This might come as a surprise to you. I'm about a one third, one third, and a one third kind of guy. One third of the time that I sit on the bench at my front door and tie on my boots, I want to do it. One third of the time, I'm neutral. And one third of the time, it's absolutely the last thing that I want to do. Believe it or not, I'm not an android. There are times when I don't want to do the fun the fun thing that I'm doing. I just don't want to do it. I don't want to put my boots on and go smash because I know it's freaking hard because I'm smashing all the time. So I have good context on how hard it is to do the things that I like to do. And sometimes I'm just not in the mood to do it. But what do? I tie my freaking boots and go smash, even though I don't want to. And that's the trick. You've got to understand that there's times that you aren't going to want to go do fun stuff, even, but you go do it. And it's the same for the stuff that is hard work. The hard work that you don't want to do, you got to go do it. One third, one third, and one third is how my life has kind of unfolded. There's many a time that I've had to do things that I absolutely think sucks, that might look like it's fun to the outside world. But in my head, I don't want to do it. But I've formed a routine, a discipline, a habit, a way of life that accepts that one third of the time it's going to be freaking mega stoke. One third of the time it's going to be neutral. And one third of the time I'm going to freaking hate on doing whatever I'm want to do or gotta do, but I still do it. And so I'm no different than anyone. I struggle on lots of things. At least one third of my life is struggle at a minimum, but it still gets done. So if anyone is tracking anything that I do and it appears easy, it's never easy, but you got to engage in life. If not for yourself, then at least for those around you so that they can see a way forward, so that they can hear, just as the panel has stated, that if we're representations of our communities, we've all found a way to represent ourselves in life. And that should be encouraging to others out there who can see that there's a path forward, that they can see there's a better way of living, that they can see there's excitement in their future, joy, pastimes, hobbies, sports, better ways to live within your community. That's what we should be seeking as individuals, but that's what we should be representing to our communities.
Yeah. Yeah, I could not agree more. There's lots of times that I don't want to hit the mats and I still get my stuff on, go put my gi on, and I go get strangled by my friends. Like this, you kind of have to do it. And I think that this brings up a really good point is it's the truest act in my mind of self-love is to put yourself in those difficult positions when you don't want to do it and do it anyway. I follow this guy on Instagram and I can't remember his name off the top of my head, but he was talking about his weight loss journey. He lost 100 plus pounds and now he's in great shape and all these things. And the thing that changed his mindset was the fact that originally he was trying to lose weight because he hated what he saw in the mirror. And then what made him actually lose the weight and keep the weight off was he loved the person in the mirror. And that going to the gym and doing those things that he didn't want to do was an act of self-love rather than hatred. And I think that it goes into this conversation so well is the fact that, if you're in a dark place and you're in a suicidal ideation moment, that the truest act of self-love is to do the thing that's the hardest, to message your friend or call somebody or go for a walk or engage in something that you just really don't want to do in those moments. I think that is quite helpful. What do you guys think? I'm going to start with Mike this time because pattern interrupt.
Yeah, I think you're 100% right. It's the decision to do the hard thing when you're in that super dark place, is what we need to educate people about, what we need to talk about. And we need to make spaces where people can do that and feel comfortable. We need to like help each other have a battle buddy, be somebody's battle buddy, check in on your people. Like I talked about this at length yesterday. Make it so that it's normal to say, reach out to someone and say, I'm having a bad day and I'm in a dark place and I want to talk about it, and have the people in your life that will help you do that. And be that person for someone and have that person in your life when you need them. Cause it's hard to make that phone call. It's hard to reach out like that. And I had a point and I've lost it now, but I think we just need to, like we keep saying, maybe I'm dumbing it down, but we just need to keep talking about it and keep asking each other if you're okay, telling people honestly when you're not okay. The more we talk about it, the more we normalize it, the better it's going to be. And I did have another point, and I will remember it while the other guys are talking.
Roch, we'll come back to you. Mark, thoughts?
Yeah, thanks, Mike. Yeah, I think one thing we could talk about is the relationship of pain, because Mike, not this time, but the time before, when you were talking about your experience as a negotiator and talking to so many people, I think we often miss that relationship of how people, when they've hit the point of suicidal ideation, plans, attempts, how much pain they're in. That's actually the opening quote in my chapter on suicide, is about how it's not a risk to be managed, but a pain to be understood. And I think if we can make that a part of the kind of psychoeducation or the teaching people about this that we do, to understand what that means, like when you're feeling overwhelmed by pain. And I think it's, in a way, our brain is tricking us into thinking this is the end to my pain. Like at the end of the day, we naturally can seek that away from pain, right? We kind of want away from pain, and it's not an end to our pain, because if someone dies from a suicide, that pain gets transferred to all their loved ones forever, right? It's such a tragic thing, but it goes back to that our mind is tricking us into that they're better without us, that we're a burden on them, and this is the end to the pain. And I've even anecdotally heard it from people. Mike, you were with Abbotsford Police, I think, so a guy like Aaron Courtney. He went on the Bend Don't Break podcast, and he talked about when his kids said, "Dad, why do you hate me?" Now, I've heard that from numerous cops, where they basically go to work, they suffer from like a traumatic stress, PTSD, and then they interact with their family, and they're not who they were, and now their family doesn't like what they're interacting with, and they don't understand it because they're talking to little kids sometimes, and then they say things like, "Daddy, why do you hate me?" And then all of a sudden that reinforces this idea of, oh, I'm a burden. If I just wasn't here, they'd be better off without me. And from people who've studied suicide notes, that's often what they find, is like a shame and a guilt of, I'm a bad person, my family would be better off without me. And I think if we could teach people that before they ever start their careers, if you look at a book like Police Suicide Epidemic in Blue, Dr. John Violanti writes basically like, we need to teach this to cops, and I'm speaking specifically about cops, before they're indoctrinated into police culture, before they're hit with the cynicism. We teach it to them before they even get into that. And I think that would be an important part of getting ahead of the problem. Like it's not just the next intervention line or crisis line. I don't want to say that's a bad thing, but we need to put way more of the effort into upstream prevention and education, as opposed to last minute intervention.
Yeah, I could not agree more with that. James, thoughts?
I'm going to come at a slightly different angle to, again, add layers to what everyone has already put in the pot, as it were. one of my observations is I think everyone who has been part of this movement, and for example, Mark writing a book on the subject, the stigma was something that we were trying to address for a long, long time. And I feel like, I know we live in an echo chamber, so it's kind of hard to really see, but I feel like that has been somewhat successful. But there are two challenges now. Obviously, where is the help? And that's a whole other conversation, from the minute toolbox that people think they have versus a toolbox that actually exists, from equine therapy to psychedelics and everything in between. But where I think we could really move the needle is the post-traumatic growth conversation, where you actually put hope back in. Because a lot of the voices out there that are talking about this, it's still kind of depressing. It's still doom and gloom. And there, I think it's incredibly exciting. I truly believe this. If you navigate your way through your trauma, through your struggles, I truly believe that becomes a superpower. And that ultimately, to me, is the definition of resilience, because your struggle could be, the mountain that we talked about last week, pushing a rock up a mountain, or it could be, navigating the layers of trauma that you have that led you to crisis. But if you understand, believe that you will be an even better parent, spouse, firefighter, police officer, whatever it is, on the other side of this, when you've gone through the darkness and you kept going, I think that message will also help spur a lot of people on. But when you have people like, well, I live with my PTSD, it's to me the same thing as, the person who's on statins and blood pressure meds the rest of their life. They've kind of stopped here, rather than having, well, as you mentioned, the person who lost 100 pounds of weight, that journey. Like, I'm gonna get to the point where I don't need these meds anymore. And don't get me wrong, there are always exceptions to the rule. There are people who are so clinically depressed, so deeply depressed, that they are going to rely on certain medications, possibly for the rest of their life. But infusing that post-traumatic growth, understanding that you can perform at a higher level, and that scar now becomes something that you're proud of, the same as the kind of Japanese philosophy of repairing broken china with gold glue. I think that post-traumatic growth and infusing hope would be the next click in this conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. Shaun, where you coming from on this?
Yeah, I agree with you, James. That is precisely the thing that I was thinking of, and how I, just as you were saying it, I was forming up sort of the same idea based on the comment about pain, and how someone will be in pain due to their belief of who they are at that moment. And so I know it's going to sound really casual, and it's going to sound like perhaps callous, but that's not my intent. I'm just going to throw it out there super quick, and then everyone can chew on it. If someone is struggling so hard that they want to stop the pain, and therefore they are experiencing pain that is traumatic in their mind, well, why not adjust that pain towards something like start a new freaking hard sport or a new hard thing in your life? If you're struggling in pain, then look for something that is difficult. Your pain isn't going to increase times 1,000. Your discomfort in who you are isn't going to get more discomforting to a point where it is so significantly notable that you never should have started that new thing. I'm left thinking about people who are in pain mentally, of course, that are sitting at home and just letting the pain increase as they wallow in their mind. The pain is already there, so why not try to recalibrate that into something, anything that has action involved in it? The mental pain perhaps can be replaced by some physical pain. And I'm using loose terms now. Obviously, I'm not saying go out there and seek to be hit 10 times by a 2x4. I'm talking about some discomfort to the degree where it is almost painfully discomforting for you to engage in that new thing. So stepping out of the wallowing mindset of your basement or your dark space or your after shift sitting in the dark by yourself, not existing outside of your mind, so much pain inside your mind that you are happy to sit in that pain. Step out of the pain and go seek some new pain is my thought.
Yeah, I think this is a great point. I was just thinking that we talk about this in growth in general in terms of time rather than pain, right? Time will pass. If you want to learn something, you can learn something over a period of time. I'm learning French right now. I could just not learn French and 10 years will pass, or I can learn French for the next 10 years and in 10 years I'll know French. But to the point of pain, if you're struggling in pain, mental pain, and you go out and do something, that pain may not go away, but you're still doing something as well. You're gaining something on top of that. So I think it's a great point in terms of that it is, if it's a static thing, there's still you have many options as well. You don't have to just sit and stew in it. I think that's a great point. I'm just going to go around again. Mark, I'm going to start with you this time. Any additional thoughts?
Yeah, sure. Well, I'll touch on culture a little bit more because I think it's a key part that we can still elaborate more on, which is how do we have a healthy culture that changes the outcomes? And really what culture is, say military, police, fire, it's an amalgamation of all these little subcultures. So what we should be looking for is which cultures continue to have the most problems, and also which cultures have had the best success or have the least problems. And in the policing context, I look at something like LAPD, and they put together a no suicide program, and they were able to greatly reduce the number of suicides that they had. And I think what we should be doing is looking for those pockets where things are going well and trying to spread that culture or what things they're doing within that culture. And as an example, they had like a suicide prevention walk. Okay, is that like, I don't know how we can actually quantify that or if we can at this point, but if we start to see that the cultures who have the least suicides have things like that, where they're making it safe to talk about it within their culture, and honestly, where they're bringing people together. Like within some organizations, we won't even release, statistics around suicide. We're so afraid of the topic that we just want to avoid it and hope it goes away. And it's so evident from decades now that it's not going to go away. And instead of, Shaun, like you're saying with the ambush, the answer is to attack the ambush. Like instead of fearing the bad thing, let's learn how we can strive to overcome it. And I think culture plays such a key role. And I think it's even more so than policy. Like culture eats policy, right? Culture's really what we do. And ultimately, it's what the senior people pass on to the newer people. And we all get to interact with culture so we can change it within our organizations.
Yeah, 100%. Mike, thoughts?
Yeah, I'm going to go back to the education part of it, how we need to spend more time educating our people and ourselves about all of the stuff that we're talking about. Understanding how your brain works and how PTSD can affect you and how trauma can affect you is as important and as life-saving as being able to handle and manipulate your firearm or being able to survive a ground fight. Talking about suicide and making efforts to prevent suicide are going to save people's lives. There's no way any police department would pass over, say we don't need to qualify on our pistol anymore. That would be a ridiculous idea, because you need to meet that standard. You need to be able to shoot. You need to be able to save your life or someone else's. Mental health should be no different. That's just as important. That can be just as life-saving for yourself or for somebody else. Because having the skills to recognize signs and symptoms and risk factors in yourself and in others might mean that you think, I better go reach out to Shaun today, or I better check on Mark, or I better reach out to James and say, I need some help. if we can focus on that education, I think, and the priority and prioritize that education, I think it can only help us. And I'll give one short example. When I first started to realize I was having PTSD symptoms, it was just this weird anxiety in me that would sort of bubble up from apparently nothing. I would literally be sitting on the couch at rest, more relaxed than you could ever be, and all of a sudden I would feel this panic, anxiety, startle response, and it would last for hours or days for what at the time I said no apparent reason. My therapist says it is for a reason. It's because your brain was broken, dummy. But once I started the therapy process and talking about it, and he educated me about what was actually happening and why it was actually happening, understanding it made it easier to deal with, and understanding it made it easier to make the right decision in the moment. Like if I'm feeling super anxious for no reason, I can maybe make that go away by having a couple shots of whiskey, or I can make it go away by going and doing something to get my heart rate up, going for a walk, going for a run, getting on the salt bike, whatever. I know everybody's laughing about me saying go for a run, because clearly I'm not a runner, but once I understood the kind of the science piece of it, and I'm not a science guy at all, it made it easier for me to make the right decision in the moment, to feel better, to build my resilience that much more, versus making a decision in the moment that might feel better in the moment, like the couple shots of whiskey, but knowing that is actually going to make the problem worse, not better.
Yeah, that goes into the removal of the ephemeralness of it, right? The mystical, the PTSD versus, oh, yeah, it's just a natural reaction. Once you have a good understanding of it, you can really engage it directly. James, thoughts?
I'm going to again shift a little direction, because a couple of people touched on, when people realize that they are struggling. Another real stumbling block that I hear a lot of people, and I'm blanking on the bloody name, but in America, we have the workman's comp section that is for mental health. And I forget the acronym. I don't know why it's fallen out of my brain. But anyway, the number of times I've heard people say, I went to my department, I asked for help, and they sent me to this organization. And it was a Russian roulette, and they think about the courage that it takes for a man or a woman to say, I need help. And then they get sent to this organization. I've had stories where they call the number and the number doesn't even work anymore. Or they call the number and they literally get sent to a child psychologist or a marriage counselor, and, completely the wrong person. And the number of stories I've heard where the counselor then is in tears, listening to this police officer, firefighter, soldier talking about what it was that, was troubling them, what were they dreaming about. And some even told them, get out my office, I can't help you, and to think that I heard those stories. So how many stories will we never hear because that was the final nail in the coffin? Well, if that person can't help me, then I guess that's it then. And so what I touched on a minute ago, I think a really powerful, important part of the hope conversation is illustrating and educating people on the absolute massive spectrum of possibilities for therapy. And everyone is different. Everyone has their own cocktail of, what's going to work for them. I hear a lot of good things about EMDR for acute trauma, but a lot of, it doesn't seem to really work. Someone just told me the other day they disassociate, so it doesn't work with that kind of personality. It doesn't work by the kind of longitudinal trauma so much. But then you've got equine and canine therapy, you've got psychedelics, you've got ketamine, you've got MDMA, you've got all these other things. Of course, you've got psychiatric meds that work for a small group of people for a small amount of time. But again, it's infusing that hope, and it's really taking a look at our departments and asking ourselves, are we ready? If someone's in crisis and they've spoken to someone in peer support and we sent them through the workman's comp, line, and now all of a sudden they're sitting in front of a counselor who's in tears, Is that acceptable? Or, which you hear more so from the veteran community, well, yeah, they said the next time they can see me is 6 months from now. Unacceptable as well. So I think this is a big part. We talk about, again, stigma, we talk about identifying, we talk about, peer support culture, we talk about, people reaching out, but it's the what's next. Like I said, you've got the post-traumatic growth conversation, but there's a bit in the middle. The barrier to entry, the financial element, are the, in the insurance, can these people afford the very therapy they need to save their lives? So I'm just going to kind of slide that back in as a topic too. How do we, a bigger conversation was how do we help push the decriminalization of the very therapies that seem to be working so well for the men and women that serve this country and have to go overseas to get the therapies, but also how do we educate on the immense toolbox that actually is available versus this little sliver that most workman's comp programs offer?
Yeah, those are excellent questions, and I don't know if we'll have time today to get into them, but we have those are fantastic questions. Shaun, any thoughts on this?
Well, hopefully we'll be able to pick up on some of that tomorrow. If not, James, you'll be coming back and we'll be having a much bigger conversation. So something that is free, that you are completely in control of, that you don't have to sign out of the library, you don't have to request from any government agency, you don't have to ask your neighbor if it's okay if you do it. It's free, completely under your control, and it will move the needle, guaranteed. And that is your sense of purpose. Your sense of purpose. If you're struggling right now, chances are you've lost your sense of purpose. And I don't mean completely lost it. It's starting to fade off into the distance. So I'm going to talk about military, Leo, or first responders specifically now. When we were all young bucks, we all signed up on the dotted line. We had a sense of purpose. And perhaps over a period of time, it got worn out of us. Maybe it was the massive pile of paperwork. Maybe it was the relentless shift changes. Maybe it was just the churn of year after year after year that wore us down. Now we're doing things that we didn't sign up for, or we weren't aware of, or we're just freaking tired of the same old nonsense that we didn't think we would have to put up with. It's the daily grind, the daily wear that will erode our sense of purpose. And so it's our job, my job, your job, whoever's listening to this right now, to freaking take some time today and sit down and consider what your purpose is. Re-engage in your sense of purpose. And if today you realize that your forward trajectory, your career, your friendships, your whatever you've got going on, if you realize that your purpose is not aligned with your immediate surrounding, it's time to synchronize those things up. Get back on your path of purpose. Remember why you signed on the dotted line. Remember why you go to work. Remember why you hang out with your family. Remember why you do sports. Get in line with your sense of purpose. And if your sense of purpose is being worn out of you for so long that you don't even remember what your purpose was, well, reinvent yourself today. Get a new sense of purpose. Project forward into the future and think that I want to be an author like Mark Bouchard. I want to be a podcaster like James Gearing. I want to have a head the size of Mike. That's an inside joke when we were teasing in the green room yesterday. So I think that we've all got to understand why we're here and tie our human existence to our mental space of sense of purpose. Make them one and the same. And in so doing, maybe you'll inspire others around you to see that it's easy to do. It's not easy work, but it's easy to do, to assign today is the day that I'm going to identify what I'm going to do for the next 10 years for myself and those around me. But you got to start the thought. You've got to add action to the thought, the homework of find your purpose today. And if you do your homework today and truly own what you come up with today, your life will get better. And these thoughts of suicide, the suicidal ideations, will perhaps fade over time, given that your time is now spent pursuing your purpose.
Yeah, absolutely. First off, we're at an hour now, and that hour just disappeared. I don't know how we made it through. Like this has been a fantastic conversation. I wish we could stay on here for the next 3 or 4 and really discuss this, but I just want to thank you guys, Mike, Shaun, Mark, James. This has been outstanding conversation. To your point, James, I just want to add this in here. I think a lot of it has to do with credit. Why the cultures aren't quite shifting as quickly as we'd like them to. And Seb said it to me at one point: was imagine what we could accomplish if no one cared who got the credit. And I think that would be a big part of it, especially within the cultures that we come from. So just as a little add on there, let's get some final thoughts on anything that we've talked about so far today, which has been quite a lot, and then we'll shut her down for the afternoon. I'm going to start with Mark this time. Final thoughts.
Sure. You know what? I will end with just that we can make a difference. We can change it. Like a belief in a better outcome. I think now that as we're talking about it and in our communities, we're becoming more aware of this as such a huge problem. And I mean, I can speak specifically for policing. If we were losing this many officers a year because a gang was killing them, like we would invest unimaginable resources into that. And we should treat it with the same level of priority. Like, to me, I view this as officer safety, right? That's what this is. And to me, that goes back to culture, because the more we can tie in with the symbols within our community, like officer safety is the answer to everything in policing. So if we can make it a part of officer safety and include that in training and in our culture, that's how we can get buy-in and how we can change people's thoughts around it and the education and change the outcomes. So I will just really want to leave it with, we can change the outcome. Like, you know, one of the quotes I quote is from Dr. John Violanti. It's at the end of the foreword of his book. And he says, one suicide is one too many. Like in that, I think that's the mindset we need to have, is like keep reducing it, you know, forever. So anyways, I'll leave it with that.
Absolutely. James, final thoughts?
I would just leave one more thought for people out there. Firstly, some homework for everyone. If you haven't read Tribe by Sebastian Junger, you have to read it. It's short, it's fireman proof. It means it's, you know, short words and not many pages. But understanding the impact that it has when you have a loss of tribe and a loss of purpose, whether you are still wearing the uniform and you got hurt, or you're off with mental health challenges, or you got promoted, now you're at a desk, you're not in a station anymore, or you got fired, or you retired. You had so many positive attributes, and it is completely normal to feel so low when you don't have them anymore, when the bay door closes behind you as a firefighter for whatever reason. And now you went from riding in a vehicle with 3 or 4 people that you literally were someone's last hope for 10, 20, 30 years. And now you're in your home, and maybe you're with your family still, maybe you're not anymore because of the job. So that purpose was so important when you stood on the diamond, when you were a brand new soldier, firefighter, police officer. And if you don't, as Shaun was saying, if you don't find a new purpose and understand that there are so many ways to serve, you don't have to wear a costume. You can serve in 1,000 different ways. But finding that tribe, whether it's jiu-jitsu or a cycling club or a chess club or whatever it is, but also that level of service, because I've seen people that transition not so well. Often they go to finance or real estate, and they just don't find that rewarding selflessness that they do in other professions. So whatever it looks like, read Tribe. But just to tack on to Shaun's comments, that purpose is so important. It's kindness and compassion that led us into uniform. When we come out the other end, we have to continue that mission. That is what's missing.
Yeah, 100%. That is a great book. I actually just finished it a couple days ago. I am 100% with James. Go read it. It's fantastic. Mike, final thoughts?
Mindful of the time, I'll try to be quick. I'm just going to talk about what Shaun said too, with the sense of purpose. I think one thing that happens to a lot of people is that sense of purpose becomes one singular focus. And for a lot of us, it's the job. And if that sense of purpose needs to be plural, there can be a whole bunch of purposes in your life, so that when one goes away or is taken away, there's still a whole bunch of others. As I approached retirement, I was very mindful of the fact that what do I do now? Like, what do I do now? So, one of my senses of purpose is to be a better dad and be a more involved dad and husband. I'm taking art classes. I'm studying for a master's. I'm building a business with another ex-cop. So losing that one sense of purpose in the law enforcement world, there was other things right there ready for me to fill that gap with. And if we don't have all of those things in place, it's really easy to get lost.
Yeah, 100%. Shaun, final thoughts?
So Mike just demonstrated a perfect example of growth mindset, coming out of one sense of purpose and directing himself, directing his own life, his own trajectory that we're all in control of. All you have to do is identify what's my next step and am I growing as a human being, moving forward rather than slipping backwards. The sense of purpose can be tied to the pursuit of betterment. And I'm sure that Mike and his partner will at one point be pursuing betterment as a team, as a business, and helping their fellow man, because that's what people do who've been in the game of service. If they stay focused, they find a way, even if they didn't start out to help, they find a way to help as they're serving themselves. They start serving others. Look at this panel right now. I find that these kind of conversations are so important and powerful because we're not a formal C-suite. No one here is the CEO, CFO, COO. We're not an organization. We're not a corporation. We're not in the business of doing nothing. We're individuals who are in the business of trying to make a change. We're trying to serve our fellow man in any way that we can without being limited by rules, regulations, and board policies. We could say anything in this episode if we felt that it was going to move the needle. Thought leaders speaking boldly, transparently on the subject is what is so desperately needed right now. Not more board policies and not more paperwork. We just need bold voices demanding action of ourselves and of each person to pursue betterment for ourselves and for our fellow man. So even though we don't have a t-shirt yet, and we don't have a large corporation behind us, I feel that these conversations are more powerful than most organizations are putting out right now. So thanks for joining us in the conversation, fellas. I hope anyone who is listening to this takes the time today to just sit down and discover, perhaps rediscover your purpose in life.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I don't have a whole lot to add except for the fact that I'm going to steal something from James. Is that I love that you don't need to wear a costume. I love that because that's really what they all are. So if you want to serve and you want to serve in a costume, go for it. Go serve in a costume. But when you're done wearing that costume, service is still service. So keep that mindset and serve. Just do it in a different way. So I think that's fantastic. I don't have anything else to add. So as we all continue to learn, build, and grow, we'll see y'all next week. Chimo. Actually, tomorrow is where we're going to see you. That's what it is. All right. Chimo, everybody.